This week we'll be focusing on a single new and important idea: curves. Curves have some surprising uses. You can, of course, draw them on the screen, but you can also move objects along your curves, even if you don't draw them, like a slot car following a track. You can use curves to control how anything in your sketch changes over time. The colors of objects, their locations, their shapes, the line weights, anything you want to animate. Because curves are so useful, processing offers us two different varieties. They're both named for the people who contributed to their mathematics. The Catmull-Rom type of curve is easy to create and manipulate, but you don't get a lot of control over the shape. Bezier curves take a bit more work, but you have a huge amount of control over the shape of the curves. This week, we'll look at both of these types of curves so that you can use them in your sketches. We'll start with Catmull-Rom curves. In this flavor, the curve that processing draws goes right through every one of the points that you use to define the curve. If the curve is not tied together in a loop, then the first and last points can be used to influence the shape of the curve. If you want, you can close the curve or turn it into a single big loop. As before, the curve will go through all the points. You can even fill this curve, and processing will do its best to keep track of which parts are inside and which are outside. We can also shape the curve with something called tightness. As we change the value of tightness, we affect the way the curve goes through the points we supply. The result can be very loopy, a little squarish, smooth, straight, or loopy in a different way. When we want to use the curve as a path for an object, then we need to find points on the curve. That's easy, and we'll see how. Then we'll take a small detour. We'll look at a few small bits of geometry that are so helpful you'll find yourself using them all the time. For example, by changing the lengths and directions of a few lines, we can make a framework in which we can draw lots of different eggs of lots of different shapes. We'll see how to scale the length of a line, and we'll also see a great little trick for rotating any line by exactly 90 degrees. We'll also see how to set the length of a line to exactly 1. With these tools in hand, we can build the little framework we saw a moment ago and draw tons of random but similarly shaped eggs. Using these bits of geometry, we can also draw offset curves. These are curves that follow a center curve, but are displaced to its side, like the edges of a roadway following the painted stripe down the middle of the road. That will wrap up Catmull-Rom curves, and then we'll turn our attention to Bezier curves. In Bezier curves, the curve goes through the points we provide, but we can shape the curves using handles attached to each point. This gives us a ton of creative control over the curve's shape. We have to put a little bit more work into it if we want individual segments to join up smoothly, but the technique is straightforward and we'll see how to implement it. We can also build up larger curves all at once if we like, and of course everything will stay smooth and controllable. We can also find points on Bezier curves, so we can move an object along the curve by moving it from point to point as time goes by. We can do the same thing with closed Bezier curves that form a big loop, even if it crosses over itself many times. With these techniques, we can make lots of points move along lots of curves. We'll also see how to create this nice effect where the circles look like they're leaving trails behind. And we can draw offset curves for Bezier curves too, of course. We'll wrap up with some examples that show these different curve drawing techniques in action. Curves are incredibly useful and flexible, whether we're drawing them, moving objects along them, or using curves to control other aspects of animation. So this week is all about curves. First, we'll talk about Catmull-Rom curves, and then Bezier curves. When we're all done, you will be a curve master.